Hey, what's up guys? Today I'll show you a true crime film. Extremely wicked, shockingly evil, and vile. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The film begins with a quote saying, "Few people have the imagination for reality." The main character in this film, Ted Bundy, is one of those people that looks at the world differently. In a maximum security prison, Liz visits her partner Ted, who is currently a prisoner. The movie flashes back to 1969, where Liz is hanging out with her friend in a college bar. Ted is seen staring at Liz, and she blushes. Ted interacts with Liz at the jukebox, and they begin flirting. The couple dances romantically as they get to know each other. After the wonderful night, Ted drives Liz home. Liz invites Ted inside her home and reveals to Ted that she is a single mother. Liz is expecting Ted to abandon her, but Ted stays to sleep with Liz. The following morning, Liz wakes up alone, and she immediately looks for Ted and her child. Ted surprises Liz with the sight of him taking care of her child. The film shows clips of Ted bonding with Liz and her daughter, but the audio narrates missing women all over their town. Women are vanishing, and authorities suspect a man that fits Ted's description. The film continues to show Ted, Liz, and their child living as a family. In the year 1979, Ted is driving around in Utah, and a police officer stops him. The police officer asks for Ted's license and begins interrogating him. The police officer proceeds to arrest Ted. The authorities lay out to Ted his duffel found in his car. The duffel bag contains ropes, a crowbar, garbage bags, and other suspicious items. Ted is then seen in a suspect lineup, and a woman who appears to be a victim identifies Ted. Afterward, Ted is put to trial, and his lawyer gets him out through bail. Later on, Ted goes home to his partner, Liz, and she immediately slaps him. Ted explains himself to Liz and tells her that he wants Liz not to worry about him. Ted promises Liz that after he graduates, they will have a nice house with a dog. Liz's daughter walks up to Ted and hugs him. This shows that Ted is a great father figure to the child and makes people believe that Ted is not capable of doing violent things. The family goes to the diner and Liz talks about what happened to Ted in Utah. Ted tells Liz that he believes that he is being set up. Ted notices a car outside the diner and points out to Liz that the car has been following him ever since he got home. Liz seems to be in confusion, but she seems to believe the words that come out of his partner's mouth. Their daughter interrupts their conversation by showing the couple her drawing. One night, Ted goes to the library to review cases for his trial. Women at the library seem to find Ted attractive. The woman sitting beside Ted reads a newspaper, and she sees Ted on the front page. The woman reports Ted to the library guard, and the guard asks Ted to leave. When Ted gets out of the library, he sees the car that is spying on him. When Ted goes home, he continues to study under the sheets with a flashlight. Ted startles Liz's peaceful slumber, and Ted surprises her with a simple engagement. In 1976, in the court of Salt Lake, a lawyer counsels Ted about his case. Later on, Ted goes to trial, and a lawyer examines the victim. The lawyer asks the victim to identify her perpetrator, and she points to Ted. Ted's lawyer cross-examines the witness and discredits her statements. Ted wins his case this time, and he celebrates with Liz. Afterward, the couple visits a dog shelter, and they bump in with Carol Ann. Liz asks Ted about Carol, and Ted says that she is only a friend. Liz begins to like a Rottweiler dog, and she says that it looks sweet. This may be a metaphor to Ted, because Rottweilers are known to be aggressive dogs, and the breed is banned in a lot of countries. Similar to Ted, the dog shows a very sweet facade, but deep inside lies the violent animal. The couple goes home, and Ted is seen pretending to be a dog playing with Liz. They continue to have a lovely night. The couple gets drunk and gets on with a fast hormone game. The following day, Ted proceeds with his trial, and the judge finds him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Afterward, Ted gets detained in the Utah State Prison. Liz receives a call from the authorities in Colorado saying that Ted might have been committing crimes in Colorado. At the same time, a homicide detective visits Ted in the prison and asks him if he ever visits Colorado. Ted dodges the question, and the homicide detective leaves him. The following moment, Ted's lawyer tells him that he falls in the bait of the homicide detective, and he will go to trial in the state of Colorado. The lawyer informs Ted that he cannot help him in Colorado, and he will be given a public attorney. Liz hears the news that his partner is in Colorado, and she is still in denial that Ted committed the crimes. Liz's best friend tries to talk some sense into her, but Liz tells her to leave. The following day, when Ted arrives in Colorado, he informs Liz that the judge allows him to be co-counsel, and he has the privilege of using the telephone uncensored. Ted tells Lily that he is reading the book Papillon, and the book is about a prisoner obsessed with freedom. Ted tells Liz that the book is about hope, and that she should not lose hope. Later on, Ted proceeds with his hearing, and the judge detains him with no bail. Ted's opponent opens the discussion of the death penalty, which startles Ted. Ted's lawyer tells him that the death penalty is only for formality, and he should not worry about it. Ted now is doubting his lawyer's skills. The following night, Ted calls Liz and asks if she has already bought a plane ticket to visit him in his next trial. Liz is seen losing hope with Ted, and it is obvious that she wants to cut his connection with Ted. On the other hand, Ted is still not losing hope, and he is obsessed with freedom, mirroring the book he is obsessing over. Ted's trial continues, and the court fills up with women attracted to him. After his trial, Ted asks the guard for a phone call, and he allows Ted. The guard flirts with a lady, and Ted takes this opportunity to escape through the window. The officer notices that Ted is missing, and he sees a note that Ted left, saying he will be right back. Ted runs quickly to an alley and changes his attire for a disguise. The judge alerts the whole county and demands Ted's arrest. Liz waits for Ted's arrival at her home with her best friend. Liz's best friend tells her that she should stop drinking and move on with Ted. Liz tells her best friend that she is still in love with Ted, and her best friend reminds her that Ted is a convicted criminal with multiple counts of murder. Eventually, Ted gets arrested, and Liz visits him. Ted gives her a copy of the Paplin book and reminds her to never lose hope. Ted is still delusional, and he wants Liz to join him in his fantasy world. But in reality, Ted is on rock bottom and no way he will escape from his crimes. Liz breaks up with Ted, and she sees loving him as a problem. Liz gives Ted her daughter's drawing and leaves Ted. Liz goes back to work, and her coworker hits upon her. Ted plans his next escape by carefully sawing the ceiling in his cell. Ted escapes again, and he is seen partying with college girls in Florida. The news flashes images of another murder rage in Florida. Eventually, the authorities catch Ted again. A lawyer visits Ted and promises him that he will obliterate Ted. The lawyer tears up the drawing from Liz's daughter. The authorities then took pictures of Ted's teeth for an upcoming trial. The media then swarms up to Ted's trial because his case is now attracting national attention. Ted is trying to call Liz, but she is ignoring his calls. Carol visits Ted and provides comfort for him. At the same time, Lizzie's relationship with her coworker is now blossoming. Ted's lawyer informs him that his trial will be televised, and Ted sees this as a mockery of his case. Ted believes that his lawyers are against him. Carol reveals to Ted that their interaction in Utah is not an accident, and she confesses her feelings to Ted. It is now Ted's trial, and his prosecutor begins presenting pieces of evidence of the crimes of Ted. Every other day, the courtroom fills up with more women attracted to Ted. Later on, while this prosecutor is examining a witness, Ted objects and tries to discredit the witness. This scene showcases Ted's skills and knowledge about the law, and his charming personality that fools a lot of people. After all the attention that the world is giving Ted, he still cannot get the attention he wants from Liz. Ted does not know that Liz is watching him from her television. Ted's relationship with Carol grows deeper because of her presence through Ted's struggles. The following day, Ted's parents visit him with the help of Carol. Ted does not appreciate this gesture, and Carol apologizes. The following trial, Ted announces to the judge that his counselor is forcing him to admit his guilt. Ted wishes to fire his counselor. The counselor angrily resigns and walks out of the courtroom. A forensic dentist presents Ted's teeth to the court and proves that the bite marks from a victim match Ted. Ted questions the validity of the evidence, but the judge disregards Ted's arguments. We could see that the judge is losing patience with Ted now, and it is predictable that the reality is not matching with Ted's imagination now. Ted then calls Liz, but her new boyfriend answers the phone. The boyfriend tells Ted that he should stop calling her. In revenge, Ted bribes the guard for him to have an exciting hormone game with Carol beside a vending machine. But the fun stops when Carol sees in the eyes of Ted his love for Liz. Ted confesses his love to Carol, and he promises the same things he used to tell Liz. The next day, Ted tries to discredit the dental evidence, and the judge does not acknowledge Ted's appeal. Ted then proceeds to propose marriage to Carol in the court, and the judge marries them on the spot. Liz watches the marriage on her television and her heart breaks. Liz blames herself that she might be the reason Ted is in prison, because she was the one to report her to the authorities. After all of the court hearings and the presentations of horrifying shreds of evidence, the court has a verdict. Before Ted finds out the verdict, Carol stops him to tell him that she is pregnant with Ted's child. The couple then proceeds to the courtroom with an optimistic mind. A jury announces that they find Ted guilty of all of his murder accusations. The judge tells Ted that he will be given the death penalty with an electric chair. Ted is still delusional, and he still believes that he is innocent until his very last moments in the court. 10 years later, Liz receives a letter from Ted that this would be the last letter that he is going to send Liz. Liz visits Ted in his detainment prison, and they talk with glass between them. Liz confesses to Ted that she is the one who called the authorities years ago, and she forces Ted to admit the crimes to her to free her from her guilt. Ted continues to deny all of the accusations, and Liz continues to interrogate Ted. Liz shows Ted a photograph of a decapitated woman, and Liz insists that Ted confess. Ted uses the glass between them, and he writes the word hacksaw. Liz walks out of the room and leaves the photograph to the investigator. Liz remembers all of his memories with Ted with a darker filter. But now, Liz is free from all the guilt that she is feeling. Liz goes to his new partner and her daughter waiting outside the prison, and they show full support to Liz. The movie tells that Ted gets executed in the year 1989, and before his executions, he confessed to over 30 murders. The experts believe that Ted's victims are more than what he confessed. Ted requested that his ashes be scattered in the Cascade Mountain, where he puts the remains of his numerous victims. Liz continues her life with her daughter in Washington, and she is sober years after. Carol then gives birth to Ted's daughter, and they spent time together when Ted was on death row. The movie ends with the list of Ted's known victims. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your fun for today.